Stewart Allen est un auteur américain, né en Californie. Il a voyagé et vécu dans de nombreux pays et vit actuellement dans la ville de New York. Journaliste, historien amateur, Stewart a gagné sa vie de mille façons, passant des vendanges à la plonge, dirigeant une troupe de théâtre ou comme compositeur de musique classique. À Calcutta, il a travaillé avec Mère Teresa dans un foyer pour les mourants. Éditeur, il a été aussi fossoyeur. Il écrit des ouvrages de fiction, des récits de voyage, des essais sur des thèmes aussi divers que la nourriture, la religion et les drogues sacramentelles. Son livre « The Devil's Cup » retrace l'évolution du café à travers le monde et examine comment celui-ci a changé la société. Peut-on considérer le café comme un des moteurs de l'histoire? Stewart en semble persuadé, et il nous le prouve avec beaucoup d'humour en menant tambour battant son enquête au pays du café. Du Yémen au Brésil, en passant par Vienne et Paris, ce globe-trotter a parcouru les 4 continents en avion, en cargo, en jeep, à dos d'âne ou à chameau. Comment est née la tasse de café? Cette saga gastronomique, drôle et érudite, a été traduite en 17 langues, et notamment en français, publiée par Noir sur Blanc, sous le titre « Le breuvage du diable ». Il a été suivi par « In the Devil's Garden », A Sinful History of Forbidden Food, qui dit tout de son contenu, publié aux États-Unis par Canongate. Au Château de Lavigny, il travaille sur un nouveau projet intitulé The Tree of Light, à la fois récit de voyage et enquête, dans lequel il retrace son voyage du Kamtchatka, dans le nord de la Sibérie, à l'Inde, en passant par l'Iran, la Chine et le Tibet, à la rencontre de différents chamans, de religieux cannibales, pour tenter d'en savoir plus et de percer le mystère sur une plante hallucinogène qui serait à l'origine du fruit défendu de l'arbre de la connaissance, dans le jardin d'Éden, selon la Bible. Stewart nous en lit un extrait ce soir, et le passage qu'il a choisi de nous présenter commence par son arrivée sur l'île sibérienne de Salakhine. Merci pour venir ici, à tout le monde, et à Sophia pour le dernier mois ici. Alors, la section que j'ai lue en anglais, ça commence quand, après j'ai fait un voyage de 2 semaines à le nord de Sibérie avec 3, 4, 5 chevaux. Et pour chercher pour un chaman qui s'appelle Bachik. Et puis, je vais à Sakhalin et ça commence. I saw the moon in my dream floating through the sky, so silver sweet. Why would anyone leave so round a wife? That's what the Koryaks say. The raven left his beautiful round-faced moon wife to move in with the ice girls, only to find they'd melted into a puddle. Silly little bird, I thought sleepily. He'd been tricked by the sun man, who ran his new moon bride across the sky. At night you can hear the raven flying after the moon, cawing, "Come back, come back, come back." I rolled over in my bunk and listened. Had I imagined the sound of flapping wings? The sound came back, and then the smell of sausage. It wasn't wings I was hearing, it was someone chewing. And then I remembered, I was in a common cabin in the hold of the freighter Shiransky, heading towards mainland Russia. A pair of buttocks floated past the edge of my bunk. Ah, the moon, I thought, so beautiful, so round. I put my head in my hands. They still smelled of horse and campfire and piss, and I inhaled deeply, trying to pretend I was back on the tundra in Kamchatka. It had still been dark the morning after Vetch's dinner party when Mikhail had shaken us awake. "Listen," he'd said. We could hear rumbling coming from the ground we were sleeping on. "The Gomols have begun to dance. We must go." The Gomols are giants who live in volcanoes in Kamchatka, where they fry whole whales, and when they burn their fingers fishing out the tidbits from the lava, their agony dance makes the mountains shake. But it was just the sound of the first winter blizzard roaring into the mountains to the north. Vetch's Valley would soon be locked down by about 12 feet of snow, and if we didn't get out before it hit, we would have to wait until the rivers froze solid enough for dog sleds. I've been to paradise and it is Sri Lanka, Anton Chekhov once wrote of this part of the world, and I've been to hell and it is Sakhalin. My plan had been to retrace the route that the Siberians followed when they walked from Russia to Kamchatka some 15,000 years ago,
over the Sea of Okhotsk. But when the captain of the Sharansky, who I hitched a ride with, announced that we would be staying in Sakhalin for 2 or 3 weeks, I decided to leave ship. Sakhalin is halfway between Kamchatka and Russia, just north of China, and despite Chekhov's comment, I didn't think it was so bad when I was there. The babushkas selling snacks on the main square were friendly in a begrudging kind of way, and their piroshkis tasted pretty good. Of course, when Chekhov had come here, as a reporter a century ago, it had been the worst of the Tsar's Siberian prisons. Everyone he met was insane from torture or boredom, and some so disoriented they couldn't even remember their name. Good parents, Chekhov wrote, prayed for the immediate death of any child they might give birth to. Those less optimistic traded away their children for a bottle of vodka. Chekhov's report about the conditions in Sakhalin failed to make the authorities change their prisoners' living conditions, but it did accidentally lead to a bright spark for native Siberians. In order to keep the journalists from meeting any actual political prisoners in Sakhalin, the police moved all of them to a remote part of the island, and one of them was a fellow named Lev Sternberg. The wardens shipped Sternberg to the north of Sakhalin, where it was populated almost exclusively by a tribe called the Nivke. The Nivke are a Paleo-Siberian tribe, like the Koryak that Vetch belonged to. But they had one tradition that was a bit different. They swapped wives. Sternberg, at the time, was a well-known communist, which is why he was in prison. And in fact, when he eventually wrote a paper about the Nivke's wife swapping, it came to the attention of Friedrich Engels, who at that point was still buddies with Karl Marx. Engels used Sternberg's paper as scientific proof that communism was man's natural state, i.e., if the noble savages of Siberia shared even their wives, did this not indicate that common property and socialism was humanity's natural primal social system, and private ownership a corrupt and cancerous deviation? Marx loved it, and when the Bolsheviks came to power, he put Sternberg in charge of the so-called small peoples of the North. This was the idealistic early days of the Russian Revolution, and Sternberg immediately created one of the most enlightened colonial programs in history. He replaced literacy programs in Russian, which were designed to eradicate native languages, with programs using the native language of the Siberians. He insisted on respect for natural indigenous religious traditions and discouraged Marxist indoctrination. The main native tradition he went to war on seems to have been the disinclination towards bathing. "I'm the great and mighty bathtub. I'm the chief of the clean latrines," went one ditty meant to encourage cleanliness. "I'm the boss of the baths and soap sets. I'm the dreaded scrub 'em clean. If I call my troops to battle, hordes of tubs will fill this place. They will scream and screech and rattle till you've washed your dirty face." Hordes of enthusiastic socialists, I'm skipping this part. Sakhalin may not have been as bad as Chekhov described, but I had no intention of staying there. So first thing the next morning, I headed to a hamlet called Komsk, where there was said to be a ferry to the mainland every other week. I was lucky, the ticket clerk said. The ferry leaves in just 45 minutes. So I sat down in the lobby to wait. I'd never been to a Siberian terminal before, and I rather liked it. There were nice old-fashioned wooden benches and an enormous sunlit window facing the village's main square. It seemed to be a popular place to visit, with people constantly walking in and then turning around and walking out for no obvious reason, and at least half a dozen people seemed to be permanently living on the benches. There was one man on a spot just below the window that got lots of sunlight that I noticed in particular. He had an intelligent face with a long beard and philosopher eyes. A retired professor, perhaps, I thought. I was taken with the way he'd stacked his belongings below the bench, a container for his toothbrush, a rag for his soap, so I wasn't surprised to see that he was wearing slippers and a bathrobe when he got up for a trip to the bathroom. He gave me a pleasant smile. Definitely a professor, one who'd renounced academia to live by the sea, I thought, or at least live in a waiting room by the sea. I pulled out my book and began to read. After about 10 hours, I again inquired about the departure time. More good news. The boat was still scheduled to leave in 45 minutes. It was evening now, and a woman in tights was dozing next to the professor. She was quite a large woman who once were able to take a hit from an asthma container that obviously had been empty for years. My bench was now filled with those neo-Nazi types you see everywhere in Siberia. They'd been sitting there for hours at that point, without speaking, and at some point it dawned on me that they weren't waiting for the ferry. They'd just come to sit in the station, as they did every day. The professor pulled a gallon-sized plastic jar from under his bench and began spooning gruel into his mouth. A flicker of interest raced down my bench. The professor had no teeth, and the gruel kept splurting out and covering his beard with lumpy droplets. He finished, smacked his lips with pleasure, and, toothbrush in hand, wandered to the bathroom again greeting everyone with a pleasant nod. No one responded. At some point, I don't know how or when, I found myself sitting in the middle of a cement field edged by ruined warehouses near the water. I was eating shashlik, which is a kind of shish kebab, with stale bread and ketchup, and there was a girl there with waist-length black hair and a red lace dress sitting next to me. She kept pulling old books out of her bag and quoting 18th century poets. I apologized for not speaking Russian, and she said, "Yes, that is good. I don't want to speak it either. Never again." At the table next to us, 3 Russian sailors were drinking out of a vodka bottle and kicking over each other's chairs. The girl made me drink from her bottle of beer. It was still sweet from the taste of her gum. "Dogs," she explained, "have no personality. And I have 4 of them, so I should know, yes? But 7 cats." I pointed to her hairless smut nearby, and I said, "Ah, but that dog has personality." No, none at all," said the girl after a sip. "Not really. Only my cats have personalities. Would you like to come to my house with me and see them for myself?" And then it was night again, and I was back at the station. Chekhov had said the people of Sakhalin were so deadened by their lives and drink that most couldn't remember their names. And I thought about this as the station filled with people milling about for no reason, men with shaved heads and women staring, everyone drunk beyond anything I'd ever seen, like an army of zombies come out of their graves. Out of the window I could see a man staggering violently down the lightless street, falling over, getting up, falling over again, over and over again, in a kind of walking convulsion, and finally flinging himself with a huge crash through the station's window. Guards rushed forward and beat him as he lay on the floor bleeding. Fellow passengers joined in, kicking him in the head and pummeling him with their fists, his skull cracking like an eggshell on the cement floor. There was blood everywhere. The professor watched, drooling as he sucked on a jar of ethanol. The skinheads began to pass out, slowly stretching out on their bodies, ropey, stinking carcasses, heads covered in bloody scabs, oblivious to the others who hit and cursed them as they were forced off the bench and onto the blood-smeared floor. This happens every night, I realized, and thought with great longing of the girl with the black hair in her forest, at home, reading poetry by the wood-burning stove, her 9 cats purring in a circle at her feet. Perhaps if I had gone with her, I'd be there now, with snow falling outside. Travel is like that. You never quite know where you'll end up. When Stalin came to power, he abandoned Sternberg's programs for the native Siberians. Non-Russian languages were banned, and native children were forced into state orphanages. Traditional ways were declared un-Russian, and merely mentioning old tales invited prison. Sternberg's successor continued to stay with Sternberg's approach and ended up being sentenced to 17 years in one of the mines of Magadan. One of the things Stalin did when he came was created a group of poets who created a new genre called novely that dominated Siberia into the late 20th century. They were written in a kind of style using the existing poems of the native people, but changing their words, and staged with troops wearing traditional costumes and duplicating the religious thoughts of the native tribes with Marxists and Stalin as gods. The old songs of Mukomor girls and magic reindeer were gone, transformed into paeans that celebrated a magic more potent, like this poem called "Lenin, You Are My Bright Sunshine." Stars from the heavens have fallen, the poem goes, into our peasant villages. Our village homes have become illuminated by the great guard of electricity. What Lenin has planned, Stalin has fulfilled. And that's it. Thank you very much.